Hello, and welcome to Ecology. My name is Mr. Nichisti. Last week, we learned about the various levels of organization. Hopefully you now have a good understanding that terminology can be arranged according to vastly different sizes and levels of complexity. Atoms are much smaller than the naked eye can see, for instance, but they build up into larger molecules and so forth. There may be billions of atoms moving around on the inside of a cell, but cells are also typically too small for us to visualize. We can typically see things like tissues, organs, and organisms. Populations might vary from the size of an ant colony to a population of whales in the entire Pacific Ocean. You see the population of lions below. Communities are more complex in that they look at relationships between multiple species, like the lions and zebras. Ecosystems take the complexity a step further by including the important non-living or abiotic factors in an area. Finally, the Earth is composed of biomes which have similar characteristics, and these take up large swaths of our planet. The whole levels of organization thing doesn't stop at the Earth, the whole of which is called the biosphere. We can envision this going further into our solar system, the Milky Way galaxy, and even the universe as increasing levels of complexity. Often our best scientists are working at the edge of these known limits, trying to find the next level smaller than even the atom or larger than the universe. I'm sure you have heard and will continue to hear about it when new levels are discovered. But for now, let's just keep track of the ones we learned about last week. In the coming weeks, I will zoom in on particular levels, so please keep in mind what we've gone over. This week's unit is titled Ecological Relationships. The first piece of understanding relationships is to understand resources. In particular, we need to be aware that resources of any type are limited. At the very beginning of the course, you created a list of resources that organisms would need to survive. Many of you included things like water, air, and food on your lists, and these are great things to consider. I like to be even more specific with these lists. We need water, but it's really oxygen from the air that we depend on to survive. Food can be broken down further into specific biomolecules, such as proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Each of these types of molecules has an important role, or many roles, in our bodies. Humans also need a long list of vitamins and minerals. So far, I have focused on just human needs, but different types of organisms, grass, deer, the peacock there, all need somewhat different, though surprisingly similar, requirements. Competition might not seem so constant, as human beings have developed sophisticated systems to transport clean water and to grow food. However, competition is a tremendously important concept nonetheless. Humans do still compete for food and water in places, but they also compete for mates and for habitat space. Homes are expensive because everyone is competing for space to live in. We have also chosen that money is a better form of competition than fighting each other until someone dies or gives up the resource. Next time you're having a bad day, try to put yourself in the position of a variety of other species who do use this method to compete. Consider trees in a dense forest competing for sunlight, or leopards and lions both competing for the same food source. Competition is so prevalent that it is split into two types, but first, let's get an overall definition. Competition results from the use of the same limited resource by two or more species. The two types are intraspecific competition, competition between individuals of the same species, and interspecific competition between individuals of different species. I always think it's important to analyze these pictures for what is the resource that these species are competing over. In the top left, we see two species fighting potentially over a mate, with the two males clashing heads until one gives up. The birds in the top right are fighting for the space on top of that stoop. In the bottom left, we have two different species of tree, and it might be difficult to see what they're competing over at first. The answer is sunlight, which the leaves need for photosynthesis. And in the bottom right, something that's more traditionally in our purview, competition over clean water. There are a few other relationships we need to be aware of, even though competition is such an important pillar for understanding relationships. Predation is a relationship in which the predator captures, kills, and consumes the prey. And you see a handful of examples below. In this case, there's still a resource involved. It's food. It's just that one species is getting that food by capturing, killing, and consuming an individual rather than competing with it. Though we should point out that prey is oftentimes a competitive resource as well. In the top left, there might be other species competing for that same insect, or in the bottom right, whatever that snake has wrapped up, I'm sure there are other predators who would eat it. Similarly, the tiger is not the only predator on the savanna. After we look at predation, we should also consider symbiosis, which is the particularly close association between two different species. And there are three types of symbiosis that we need to be aware of. Parasitism is the non-mutual relationship where one individual, known as the parasite, feeds on another individual, known as the host. There are many strategies that parasites employ to survive, and we will look at these in more detail in a later lesson. As you can see, there are many different forms of parasites. We see the mosquito on human skin seeking food from the blood of the human. And we also see a tree as a host for different species of lichen. Commensalism is another important relationship. This is an interaction in which one species benefits and the other is not affected at all. On the left, the Cape buffalo and this is an interesting example that highlights the point that perhaps commensalism is an impossible relationship to define, as it involves one species receiving no negative effect or no benefit. In this case, the Cape buffalo are providing protection to the birds, but I would argue here that the birds are providing protection to the Cape buffalo as well. If another predator, like a lion, approaches, the birds will start creating a noise that alerts the Cape buffalo to the danger, because the Cape buffalo can't see over the grasses. So even though I've put this picture in with commensalism, one thing we'll go over next time is how commensalism is a rare relationship to find in its truest form. The picture on the right might be a better example of commensalism. In this case, it's hard to see the benefit that the shark gets, though the smaller fish use it as a form of protection. I think that's a better example of true commensalism. Finally, we also need to be aware of mutualism, which is a cooperative relationship in which both species benefit from the interaction. We'll go into this in more detail next time, but we see here a pollinator, in this case the butterfly, getting its food from a plant. This is probably the most important mutualistic relationship, as it's how plants reproduce and it's how many small insects get their food. There are many other types of mutualism that we'll go over in the future. Thanks for listening to this week's lesson, and please look at the other activities for the unit.